Hey everybody, it's Marking Bad, and I was hoping to encourage a social worker who has a particular opinion on domestic violence to debate me live. And actually, I'd intended to have my current guest, Saul Frigoris, known as at Done Reasoning on Twitter, act as a moderator because Saul tends to be very good at making me rethink where my biases are and tends to play a very good devil's advocate. Now,
thank you very much for having me.
I'm very happy to have somebody that challenges me. In the event that we do have the social worker attend us, then we will return to matters of domestic violence. However, that person decided that they wanted to discuss a wide range of things. And one of those things happened to have been the wage gap. And Saul and I kind of started on that. So I'm going to tug aside something, and I'm going to share it here because it's really rather interesting. And if you give me a moment, I will sort out how to do that. We have this article, which, so the common premise of the wage gap is that men working full-time and women working full-time earn disparate amounts. I believe that is a fairly succinct summation, Saul. I mean, can you think of any other way to put that?
Not really. It seems fair.
That's my interpretation. Aggregate earnings of men versus women, when considering full-time employment, have some disparity. And that's the crux of the argument. Now, this particular article solely focuses on the realm of nursing, in which there is a remarkable disparity in gender representation. And this article specifically deals with North America, in particular the US. However, as this article points out, about 6% of nurses in the United States are men, which means logically that you would assume 94% to be women. However, men are represented in much higher paying specialties than women are. So
which seems to me to be the clue for whence the wage gap, if ever existing, comes from.
That would be my presumption. They cite that, for example, 49% of certified registered nurse anesthetists in the US are men. And that, now, this is from 2005. These things could have changed. I'm not going to say that this is the most accurate possible statistic. I have no reason to doubt it without access to better statistics or more recent ones. But certified registered nurse anesthetists had an average salary in 2005 of $160,000. Now, that is also a master's degree. So that is a commitment to 8 years of education.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Sarkan is around, and I'm going to send him a link to the Hangout.
Absolutely.
Super, because he's setting himself up real quick, as he says.
Oh, that's fine. The other person that may be attending us that is not the social worker that had specific opinions on domestic violence had complained that they consider phones to be the Swiss Army knife of talking to other people when it comes to online media.
Not only that, but Swiss Army knives of everything. I mean, they make photos and tune into radios and whatnot.
Oh yeah, they're amazingly useful things, and in many ways, Albert Einstein was right. There will come a point where technology makes us stupid. And that's not an accurate quote. That's a rather horrible paraphrase.
But I think any viewers, listeners, and myself, we see your point.
Really wish I was smart enough to figure out how to get to the chat. I'm going to do that. I'll figure that out someday. Yeah. Yes, I'm sure the viewers are busy chattering away, and I'm completely lost as to what's going on. Live control room. I found a button.
Button for what?
Failure's busy complaining about me, and Patriarchy Bear is busy being he's being a mod. So, Patriarchy Bear, relatively speaking, not particularly bad as a mod. I'll be honest. He just kind of patriarchs around and is a bear.
Yeah, and demands sandwiches.
Pretty much. That seems to be his primary function, is more sandwiches for the bear.
Yeah, but he has a working mind. I appreciate his input all the time.
Now, something else that jumps out at me in this particular discussion concerning the wage gap is right here, is military nursing is also a popular option for men. And that choosing to dedicate oneself to military nursing has the benefits of competitive salaries, and you get financial incentives such as repaying student loans, special payments, housing allowance, and affordable insurance options. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily. Now, I'm not entirely familiar with how the military medical system would work in your country, but I've got a vague understanding of how it works in Germany. And in Germany, as you leave high school, you are recommended to engage in public service. And if you happen to be particularly fit, they direct you to the military. If you are a more social person, they direct you to things like working in hospitals or childcare or whatever. And you do essentially an apprenticeship period with either the military or in some form of social service. And then that acts as, for lack of a better term, kind of a down payment on some portion of your higher education.
Maybe what we have here is tax-paid education. We absolutely do not usually get, encouraged to go into any in a public space or social space. We just sort of go through our schools and universities and whatever.
Okay,
then we fend for ourselves, but
so there might
no student loan.
Within the context of high school, there might be some suggestions that, okay, well, this person seems to be really good at fixing things, so maybe they would enjoy being a mechanic or an engineer or what have you, but they direct you towards things you would enjoy, as opposed to saying you need to go and do some form of public service.
Okay, I was unfamiliar with all that. All I know is we are all left to fend for ourselves.
Yeah. In Canada, we have guidance counselors, among other things, but we also have registered apprenticeship programs in which, say, automotive shop, where you can choose to take that as a course. So you would spend time in a part of the school where they might bring in the teacher's car and you learn how to change the oil in it. And if you do particularly well, your guidance counselor might say, well, maybe you have a potential future career as some form of mechanic, whether it be a diesel mechanic or a heavy duty mechanic, or an automotive mechanic or a small engine mechanic.
I think this is a thing that goes on with our own trade schools. We have those.
Okay. Well, and here in Canada, at least in Western Canada, we certainly try to at least give a little guidance to students in high school. You look like, based on the way you deal with your classes and you behave, you would be really good as a social worker. So we're going to encourage you to do more things that would encourage you towards that in high school or in university. And maybe this other student is particularly good with building and taking apart things. So maybe they want to be a mechanic or an engineer, and you kind of guide them towards more of the STEM classes.
Perhaps what we have is, I keep forgetting the word, but we have a principal over every class, and this person usually deals with getting to know their students, and perhaps they sometimes could slip in some sort of advice, but
yeah,
not usually from what I know, and I am a teacher, it's just not a thing. People just figure out what they want to do and pursue that.
So where you're from is very much like Sweden, where there's no specific direction that is encouraged. And yet people kind of sort themselves out according to their agency.
It would appear so, which of course doesn't mean that we don't get incompetent people, but
No, well, somewhere in the world,
everybody does.
somewhere in the world, the world's worst doctor is currently serving a patient.
Yeah. And plenty of those too.
All too many, it seems. I'm going to stop screen sharing that for a moment because I think everybody had more than enough time to read that. Insofar as it relates to the wage gap, if you really want that particularly high-paying job, my father is a teacher, so I understand some of where Saul comes from. Part of the reason my father stopped teaching and started focusing on his continuing education degrees is because my father treated teaching as a vocation. And Saul, I'm not sure if you understand what I mean, but he treated it as a vocation in a religious sense. This was actually his calling. This was something that he was meant to do.
Yeah, I got that.
My father happens to be, I wouldn't call him devoutly Catholic, but certainly observant. And he certainly felt that it was God's plan for him to be an educator and a mentor. And he became very disillusioned when he saw how the education system has moved away from people that want to teach because they want to be mentors and be educators and reach out to students and instill in them the importance of lifelong learning. And it's become, for lack of a better term,
circus training.
Yeah. Preparation for pulling levers. It is very much, the way he put it once was he felt like he was reduced to nothing more than the man attending the monkey that ground the little organ. He was preparing children to twist the little organ to make the music. That was it. There was no greater calling there.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that.
And to be fair,
but I given the field that I'm teaching in, which is classical performance of music and music theory, I get to defy the curriculum because it's ridiculous, even in our field. But I also know, let's put it this way. From all that things that I'm teaching, I also get to teach, real people, right? And I interact with them. And so in order to instill some sort of understanding of this and that issue, I also try to relate to them, to the things that they are supposedly learned already in, but they are not. In fact, what they know is to regurgitate what was put in their heads and not much else. Schools at this point actively discourage people from thinking or using critical skills.
And there's two parts to that. One is that many of the students you probably interact with on a regular basis, to some extent, are choosing to pursue education with you. Some of those students are going to be extracurricular students where you've taken on additional studies with them, whether it's their parents putting them in, say, guitar classes with you or piano classes with you. But also that some of the failing of the, at least the North American system for certain, is that it's designed on a very early industrial revolution model.
Yeah.
People need to be just barely competent enough to pull the levers.
Yes, and the people themselves are also treated that way based on their date of production.
Yeah, so
there is no regard, despite what you just told me about the the guidance system that you've described, but there is no regard to their actual faculties or their own mind on things.
For instance, a modern day Mozart or a modern day Einstein would be no better recognized in our current system than they were in the systems that were extant during their own lives.
Well, luckily, there was no such system.
When Mozart was around, at least.
No, definitely not. But when Mozart was around, it was just trade teaching. What was it called?
If you wanted to be a musician in Mozart's era, you were either your parents hopefully got you involved in the church, or you simply came from a rich family that had access to instruments.
But instruments weren't that expensive back then, and in case of Mozart specifically, it was his father who was already a composer. He just set him up for it, so to speak.
Apparently, according to modern social justice, Mozart would have been incredibly privileged, because remember, reading to your children at night privileges your children.
Yeah, and so what?
Instilling them in the. So when I was in play school, pre-grade 1, I would have been about 4.
Mm-hmm.
I was coming home with. I was already coming home with homework, and it was literally as simple as go home and read a story to your parents. And I was very resistant to this. And my father would take me aside. No, this is the 15 minutes where we read a story, and you read it to me. And it instilled in me, over the course of that year, an actual love of literature. I read voraciously. I've got a book 3 feet to my right called The Narcissism Epidemic. I'm by no means any kind of psychology student, and I'm reading about psychology as it relates to endemic narcissism in modern society.
I would say that studying psychology makes you a student of psychology, because academic studies is one thing. It's just an easy source, source of sources.
Yeah, well, but then you get
and people trained in a given field that could point you to the right sources on the right premises, but it shouldn't be seen as any sort of elitist instance.
No,
where it would be only exclusive to students who attend the classes.
But
it used to be, but it's not anymore.
That would return us to the potentially pedantic argument that to be a student of knowledge makes one a philosopher. And I honestly believe that everybody should be encouraged to learn for its own sake, if only to make yourself better able to navigate the world. I mean, immediately to my left, I have history of Western philosophy.
Hello, the Sarkon.
Hey, how you doing?
Hello. Apparently, you've managed to muddle through the whatever the program is.
Yeah, I got it on my iPad here.
Rich privilege.
Around with this computer. I use Linux, and I'm trying to get it to work. I couldn't get it to work, so I just fired up the iPad.
Don't malign him too much for rich privilege, because I currently own a BlackBerry mobile device.
I love the kids that claim to be communists and they post a picture. I just got my new iPhone. My product of capitalism.
Yeah. I think we all saw that.
That poor girl. I'm a communist. I have an iPhone 5C. Well, okay, you're kind of missing the point, dear.
She's bragging about what she has while other people's go without.
Yes, well,
supposed to be the arbiter of fairness.
Well, that could be used as an argument that it shouldn't be so. Take away my iPhones.
I think we should start from the top down, and we should start taking phones away from people that really don't need to have social media. And honestly, I'll be fair. I think that most politicians don't need social media.
Oh, yeah.
They just post their own policies.
Then again, other people need them to. apparently, because they wouldn't have,
Well, we wouldn't have things to be outraged against.
That's what feeds him is the
and
outrage.
that's why it's needed, because people apparently cannot leave without being outraged. Well, it's true. It's outrage culture.
Absolutely is. I mean,
it's the basis of the value signaling. You can't value signal until you're outraged. So what you'll see is somebody will post a news article, or they'll say, "Look at this video," and then they'll see 1,000 just a quote unquote this.
Yeah, this is
Just
all virtue.
this.
It is called virtue signaling, I believe, where
Yes.
somebody points at a thing, then points at oneself and says, "Look at me! I noted that you didn't. Now get on with it. Notice the same thing and be as awesome as I am," as opposed to those who refuse to.
It's about social feedback. It's about getting social capital from one another and reinforcing one another's doctrine and dogma.
Agreed.
It's groupthink. It's groupthink incarnate. It's about removing oneself and one's critical faculties to signal the dogma back and forth to one another.
Yes, of course, while at the same time attaching oneself to being the one to do it.
Exactly. They do the same things. They just
Yeah.
and
violate
that's
their own rules.
and that. But something that Sarkon mentioned was the concept of social capital, and
Yeah.
that is very critical. And I've been watching. I don't agree with absolutely every point of Professor Jordan Peterson's beliefs, but I mean, I live in Canada. I understand implicitly what he's discussing, and I agree in principle with much of what he's discussing. And much of what's being presented as an argument against him functions as virtue signaling for the purpose of generating social capital.
Yeah.
There's no greater purpose to it. Look at my high horse. Look at how amazing my high horse is. Don't you see how much better I am than you? Don't you want to aspire to be like me?
Exactly. It affords one status. It's sort of like people think money affords people status, but it's not money itself. It's the power that money brings in the social capital. Because when we say somebody is successful, what do we say? Look, he's got a giant bank account. That's what we point to.
Well dressed.
It's the same thing.
Next thing we point to is, well, how do we become the same?
Yes. And that's
But I would be interested in knowing what are the points that you disagree with.
I'm not. I was raised Catholic. I'm by no means observant as a Catholic, and I have not explored enough of Professor Peterson's religious beliefs to call him a suppositionalist. But to me, he tends that way. He seems to be fairly devout in his religious expression, and there are some aspects of where he is coming from that certainly draw from that. Now, that said, there is by no means any reason to discount much of what we have discovered through theology and theological philosophy.
Which is quite different from religion itself.
Yes. I mean, looking at the philosophical explorations of Martin Luther and what that generated positively for society is very different from looking at the paper he stapled to the or nailed to the front of the church.
Which is a legend.
It is.
It is.
But
It hasn't
nonetheless,
been independently verified. I don't think it'll ever really be known.
no, I mean, short of somebody coming up with a real Hackerman program like Kung Fury apparently has.
But no, but what I was trying to address was I was just interested in what sort of points did Peterson make that you would disagree with?
That theology needs to adequately explain the entirety of our experiences.
Did he posit that?
He certainly seemed to.
Oh,
To me,
well,
it seems that what he's talking about are the fundamental underpinnings and the social institution of religion itself. What it does is when you have to look at the it provides one with a sense of meaning. It provides one with a lens of looking at the world, understanding the world. I mean, I just like the little quips in life. When somebody passes away, we know that they just passed away, but it gives you meaning and reason for it and hope.
And the commentary that frequently follows the passing of someone is they've gone to a better place. That gives us a sense of both closure and of positivity for that event.
And it really sets up a system for society to function on, because when he talks about Jesus, he's talking about the highest point was truth. And in the Christian religion, that is one of the chief things. Is the truth as a number one when you are speaking, when you're talking to someone. So if we lose the virtue of truth, we lose the ability to objectively assess reality and to police the extremes, because the Overton window keeps moving in whatever direction you have. And the people on the furthest end that are on the undesirable end are ostracized, and the people on the furthest other end are the paragons. Most people tend to rely in the middle. You can be close to the end, but as long as you don't stray too far, you're not going to be given the boot. You're not going to be given the ostracization. But the window itself never moves backwards. It only moves forwards.
Well, so, and that is the fundamental problem with
yes.
assessing the middle ground fallacy, is because fundamentally most people operate within the premise of a middle ground fallacy.
Yeah.
Well, does it really make it a fallacy?
It doesn't, and that's why identifying it is actually quite difficult.
It's hard to explain. I think most people are...
Because that would sound like forming a norm.
And that's the thing, is that just because something is... So you run into the issue of both the naturalistic fallacy and the middle ground fallacy. Something being normal is not necessarily wrong, and something being the middle ground between two extremes is not necessarily wrong. There are cases in which...
Not necessarily right, just is.
Yeah, it just is.
What I was getting and trending towards was, in a society like, well, not a society, but an institution like college, you're supposed to talk and debate. And the point is to hunt for truth. That's the whole point of a university, is to test ideas for truth. But when you have the Overton window in a place like that, you shut off the ability for debate. All you have is a constant reinforcement of the same doctrines.
Yes.
What happens is, if you stray too far in the opposite direction to the undesirable, you get the ostracization. Nobody wants that, but you're always rewarded for pushing it further.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and that's the problem. The further it goes, the further that undesirable end keeps moving further along with it. So that the less extreme.
That's where we've seen, and I'm not keying on a specific time where liberalism explicitly or liberalized ideas was explicitly ostracized outside of, say, the late 60s in the US during the anti-war movement.
Yeah.
But it was, like, I mean, that was a very relatively extreme liberalist movement. And now we're seeing the reverse of that, where anything conservative, or anything even that could be assigned conservative, is now considered worthy of ostracization.
Well, it ties back in, I think, with what Dr. Peterson says when he talks about the society being this many-layered thing like an onion that has its, out of sort of a Darwinian development, has developed into a somewhat well-balanced system, as well as it can, at least in the West. And that system was based in a set of values, strongly influenced by Christianity, strongly influenced by the Enlightenment, and many other factors. Mm-hmm. And that when Christianity was given the knock, and basically it's a minority now, anyone who's really says they're Christian is very much a cultural thing, even if they may have a nominal belief. And those underpinnings are gone. So you don't have the rigid set of values that are constantly reinforced through the family. The nuclear family, that's been abolished basically as a set standard. The religious institutions that reinforce these beliefs through each generation have been primarily abolished. And then what you're left with is the Enlightenment values. Now, those work well if they're allowed to flourish and you have an open environment free of fear. But if you start binding the hands of people and a doctrine starts coming in without
and that is where I fundamentally most strongly agree with Dr. Peterson, is that the evolution of language and the evolution of the thought it engenders
Right.
is best left to the natural evolution of societal discourse.
Yeah. And that's
Because-
part of the problem.
I agree with that too.
There's nothing more powerful than exposing an argument to the light of day. So,
Yes,
I-
sun is the best disinfectant.
absolutely.
And that's why political correctness always takes the form of suppressing it.
Well, and I find
because that's because political correctness implies there is something politically incorrect.
Right.
and that's the thing, is that there is something, you could argue that there is something that is politically inaccurate or politically harmful, but there is nothing that is inaccurate without having been examined and
Right.
determined to be untruthful.
That's how I determine when there's somebody's got an agenda. You target somebody and then determine whether or not they're obstructing the truth. If they are obstructing the truth, they're using straw mans. They're changing the subject. They're just whatever the case.
Well,
They're blocking the truth for a reason, and that
the
reason.
individual that I had intended to invite here to defend their position on domestic violence, I made the statement: men and women are equally likely to be victims of domestic violence,
That's
and
true.
they immediately ran off towards, well, but general violence. Well, no, I'm not discussing general violence. I am
Violence.
discussing the specific subcategory of domestic violence.
Exactly.
We can call it intimate partner violence or intimate partner abuse or domestic violence, but we are contextualizing this as violence or abuse or control measures within the context of some kind of partnership that is more than platonic.
Right.
And I'm not discussing the 8 murders that happened in Chicago this weekend. I'm discussing the man or woman that beat their partner in Seattle this weekend. That's what is relevant to me. And understanding the reasons and purposes behind that makes it more clear how services could be better provided to prevent a further incidents.
Right. And you run into the obfuscation there, their prevarication, the hiding from the truth. And there's a reason for doing that. Every person who attempts to hide each shutdown debate, whatever the case, is to prevent discovering the truth or the investigation of their ideas. And that means they have a reason for doing it, which means it's serving an agenda. So there's a specific agenda at work in mind that they want to raise above the truth and press for any number of reasons, for social capital. You see how the schools are working to relieve people of individualism, individual critique, individual investigation, which I don't accept anything as true.
Honestly, I would indict the school system in general in North America as doing far more than that. And I do that based on both my own experiences and the experience. Like I mentioned to Sol earlier, my father was a teacher, and he believed that to be his vocation in a very religious sense. My father felt that to be his calling. And he left teaching because he felt it had become burdened by bureaucracy and the presence of individuals that saw an education degree or a teacher certificate as an excuse to get into management.
Right.
Which is something I relate to very strongly as a teacher myself.
I mean, I have to look no further than it's not even so much as there's an intentional movement to train people to be no brighter than necessary to perform the Jetsons button pushing, which Saul, I don't know if you ever watched the Jetsons, but
yeah. Oh, honey, I'm so tired. Why?
But-
I had to push the button today 3 times.
yeah. But there's also and I hesitate to say this, but I keep coming back to this. I sincerely believe that while first and second wave feminism had their values,
Oh yeah, those
third
made
wave
sense.
feminism has prosecuted a particular campaign to vilify masculinity in and of itself, the state of being male, as somehow inherently bad.
I think it's. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And we've seen this carried out. I legitimately have neurochemical attention deficit. Something in my brain does not produce enough of something else. And in order to be a fully functional adult, I take medication because that is the best possible solution for me. And yet I look at the statistics relating to young men in elementary and secondary school, and 4 out of 5 medicated students are boys. And they're medicated for being boisterous and outgoing and exploratory, which are elements of masculinity.
Right. These are biological in and of themselves.
If it were not for the ability of young boys to climb trees, then we would not know that trees are climbable.
I think it's important to know
all that trees can make you fall.
Fall down and break your arm.
And you get back up.
And mom comes swooping out to protect the nestling that has quite literally fallen from the nest.
Well, let me just interrupt that for a second. I find these news of the world that you just said too, it's a bit alien to me because where I grew up, which is Poland, there is no such gender disparity. If girls go climbing trees, they are perfectly free to do so. So do boys.
Right.
I do not get the medicating it. It would be, well, our girls would be medicated on par with boys for the same things. But what's going on over there?
I wonder if you guys were under the Soviet bloc for a longer time, under a much greater period of oppression and suffering, and I'm wondering because the West has been free of that pretty much for a very long time, and I'm wondering if the adversity tends to breed a sort of cultural strength, a sort of cultural ruggedness and endurance and perseverance, a spirit of perseverance.
What we really got from all that was we got to know the whole regime and the social consequences firsthand.
Right.
Actually,
even if I did not, because I was born in '88, which was right at the end of communism and USSR.
You were at the tail end of last.
You're a living memory. It's still a living memory there. So it's still the consequences of it and the adversity.
Yes, but what I'm trying to point at, which is a bit difficult, so forgive me if I stutter a lot, but. What I'm seeing here as a juxtaposition toward the West is that it's a pity you had the witch hunting McCarthy and all that because otherwise you might have just gathered enough knowledge of these things to prevent them, because as it is now, even though we have a right-wing religious party ruling our country right now, we are still largely centrist.
Right.
And also we had to deal with the communist equality, communist brand of equality, which actually resulted in not laws that weren't gendered, and fields of work and professions that aren't necessarily that gendered either. Just because there was, when communism hit and we had this job market full of jobs but no people to do them because nobody wanted to work and everybody wanted to reap the benefits.
Basically, it boiled down.
Then everybody was good for anything as long as they did the job.
Yeah.
Right.
And that sort of mentality still persists, even if we are at this moment evolving more towards the Western models that you are currently having problems with, especially feminism and stuff that is trying to cash in on pointing out all the perceived oppressions and stuff. We didn't have to deal with it for some time. We just know that one is, well, I mean, we culturally, but also from my own upbringing, Let me put this in the most anecdotal way. I know that we are all left to ourselves, no matter the circumstances or the political climate or whatever. And folks seem to miss that a lot. So the point I'm trying to make, because the point hasn't been reached, is that we know the equality proposed. We know what is a totalitarian regime firsthand. We grew out of it in a big loan that saved our lives, quite literally. And we retained much of it. Much of the centricism that we got in the 90s, it was a popular stance to be totally apolitical. It's just changed in the last decade or so, maybe a little bit more. And all those social movements and other things do not happen. Granted, we do not have racial pressures or anything like that, even though we do have people from other countries and we do have people from other races, if there is such a thing as other race, because to some it clearly matters a lot. But they are just citizens living the citizen life and doing their thing.
Now, so what I take away from this is, one, that McCarthyism in the U.S. served as a
shield.
Well, it served as a function, whether or not it was legislated or not, served as a means of suppressing a form of free speech, thereby causing it to become an undercurrent.
That is one way to put it. Or somebody sheltered from a vaccine
was unaware of, when they were later exposed, that would be necessarily what caused them to be ill.
Perhaps, yeah.
The other thing I take away from that is that, for good or ill, the introduction of Soviet technique to Poland was that when it came time for people to build houses or people to build tanks or Ladas or whatever, it was simply a matter of whatever the job was, it was assigned based on the merit of the individual so far as them being able to do the job. So if you had a bright young Polish girl in from the farm, if she was particularly fit, she might be put to work putting up the walls of a building. Or if she was a particularly sweet young girl, she might be asked to be a nurse or what have you.
Something like that, but one tidbit to it is, no matter one's fitness or whatever, if one was available, they would just be picked for the job. I know that my mom was picked for the job in a bank just because she was she was walking on the pavement and the recruiter just recruited her.
You look like you could work in a bank, and off you go.
Well, it was almost literally that way, yes, because they were underhanded.
Yeah, we need somebody in a bank, and you don't appear to be doing anything, so you're going to go and you will report for noon.
Another little tidbit to all that was farm people were the most fucked people of all communists. Because they were the ones working their asses off to feed the whole country, and they would have to wait for the redistribution to even get any of it back.
Well, and that's
the countries were fucked over sevenfold, and thus, the country hates communism and the town people, and to this day.
That is something that Jordan Peterson mentioned, was that one of the most horrific parts of the Soviet technique was that the Soviets would come in and they would examine a small town, and these 10 people are the most affluent. Mm-hmm. Have the largest farms or whatever it is, and they would find the 20 malcontents, that these are, for whatever reason, people that were incapable of conforming to the norms within that community. And they would agitate for those 20 to rise up against those 10 successful people, saying, but you're oppressed because those people have been successful. And this is something that very much plays out in, I don't see any reason to not call it Peterson's Law, his explanation of how social justice warriors persist.
Yeah, that's the important point, is to take the notion of equality of outcome, which is to look at the classes, look at which group is the most successful, and then to consider the most successful group perpetrators, and then the others are victims, they're the oppressed, and then you do what you can to pull down the ones that are higher up. Now, individualism has always said, look, if you're farther down, we're going to try and lift you up. But it's the opposite with the equality of outcome. They want to pull it down while trying to push the other group up, and it screws everything up. But if you look at the system of feminism, of how it takes men as a group, and says you're the perpetrator. You look at race, right? White people are the perpetrator. It's the same mechanism in every single point.
This is fundamental to all aspects of postmodernism drawn from the Frankfurt School, is that there is a white, cis male, heteropatriarchal capitalist system that inherently oppresses all individuals that are not somehow either part of it or complicit in it.
Right. That's part of the...
And that's...
people are fucked either way.
That's the perpetrator narrative. You're the oppressor. So what they'll do is they'll find something within your demography, within your framework, within your birth, religion, and they'll assign it like historical racism. But we're not living in history anymore. So, but they drag it in and they use that and they can consistently hold it into the light. There's a quote. Do you know who Dr. Robin DiAngelo is?
It's vaguely familiar, but
She created the term white fragility. I'm going to read off a quote for her. Let's see. And show you guys exactly what I mean. Let's see here.
Well, if you can pull it up on screen, then I can share it. But I mean, basically everything about most of postmodernist Marxist theory reads very much, if you actually examine it, reads as what is clinically diagnosed as an abuser narrative.
Yeah.
What is that narrative?
Abusers will frequently, it's called DARVO in clinical diagnosis, as I understand it, where it is deny, I would have to look it up. What it boils down to fundamentally from my very loose recollection is no matter what you are caught red-handed doing, there is a reason that you have been driven to this. So basically it's the ultimate in victim blaming.
Yeah.
I actually posted in the last video that I made about 6 months ago in the victimhood privilege video, where I said basically that the privilege of the victim is to name the victimizer.
Yeah, well, so the ideal example is in the context of domestic violence, women are not abusers. Women are reactive to patriarchal aggression.
Yeah, of course, and that justifies every mean that they take to get even, if not equal.
And that was something you and I discussed on Twitter, is that if I were to be abused, if I was completely, and the word just fell in my head, if I were to be non-responsive and just absorb abuse,
absorb.
that is still, to some individuals, I'm still being an exemplar of patriarchal privilege because I'm more capable of absorbing abuse.
So that's the notion that they take. The individual is divested of their individualism.
Mm-hmm.
You are lifted up. Your collective group identity is lifted up as the perpetrator. You are no longer an individual member of a group who happens to carry the skin color or whatever it is. You are now a representative of that group. So you are a giant puzzle, and you're one piece of that puzzle. You're immovable, irremovable from it. And so when you are getting attacked by her, it's seen as your group getting its comeuppance. It's your group because you're not receiving the abuse. You see,
The irony.
This is scapegoating, and also Francesca Ramsey did a video on it lately about the race ambassadors. Have you watched it, guys?
But I have not. I try to avoid Francesca Ramsey just on general principle because
I was pointed to it by some YouTuber.
I don't have a lot of time and I don't have a lot of hair. And
you do still have the beard.
I do, but I don't want to tear any of it out. I have enough problems keeping my hair.
Here's the quote here from Robin DiAngelo. She created the term white fragility. Which she describes the term white fragility as a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive motives. Now, understand that she's saying to white people when you talk to them, like, press or things like that. The notion of equality in the United States, at least, was that by the content of their character, so the individual was the basis for rights. You didn't hold people to their demographic because people aren't a demographic; they're individuals. So when Dr. King says by the content of their character, he was talking about that's the only judgment, the only acceptable basis.
That's the metric by which you judge.
Right. So this became the standard in the United States. So what she did was she created this system, and here's her words about individualism. Individualism also allows whites to distance themselves from the actions of their racial group and demand to be granted the benefit of the doubt as individuals in all cases. Individualism erases history, she says. Her purpose is to keep a story,
a historical narrative.
Yes, and then what she does with that is she foists it upon white people as a group. You're guilty because you can't distance yourselves from the actions of your group. And then knowing that people are going to react negatively to this because they have been Dr. King's content of character, individualism, of course they're going to react negatively. So she comes up with a fun little term to insult people, gets to write books about it, makes money off of it, and now travels the country. So her term white fragility is a natural reaction to a violation of Dr. King's principle by the content of the character.
So literally what she has done in invoking her white fragility is an expression of Sargon's law.
That's
exactly what she's done.
Your insecurity
pulling down any meritocracy that could have been attained.
Yeah, that's exactly what she's done. The term is meant to insult people for a natural, healthy, normal reaction to probably the pinnacle of human moral achievement, which was by the content of their character, individualism, race, sex. These things don't matter. They're irrelevant. All that matters is the individual, the person, and their character, how they act, what they do, how they live.
Yes. Well, and to put this on a more like personal level, there are 4 things that I will not tolerate being called. You will not call me a liar. You will not call me a thief. You will not call me a goof. And you will not call me lazy.
Okay.
And the term goof is particular to, I guess, Western and Canadian and an American vernacular. It's a reference to a kitty diddler.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, so what's the thing with Goofy, the dog from Disney?
That was much earlier, but the term goof in prison vernacular drew from it. That fucker's goofy.
Okay.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Calling somebody goofy is not a big deal. Calling somebody a goof, pretty big fucking deal. There are other terms, but I mean, and the reason that I have those particular rules insofar as I interact with people is because I am not particularly indolent. I'm not lazy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a liar. I'm not a thief. And if there is one thing that I will fucking murder myself over, it is to protect a child. And
okay, but then do you have the regressive reaction if somebody unwittingly calls you a goof, referring to you being goofy?
Why they why they have that perception of me.
Okay, that's fair, because I was just curious.
No, and to be fair, like I grew up around people that calling somebody that
Mhm.
is grounds for immediately fighting.
Yeah.
If you and that's the thing is if you in like that's one of my major arguments against the notion of rape culture.
Well, but this would be in
This is
turn my own rebuttal to the notion of hurtful words. You can call me anything because that says more about you than it does about me.
Well, but there are certain things that I will not I absolutely will not countenance, and one of them is
No,
harm.
I'm not trying to tell
No, I'm
you,
just saying,
to change your stance. Just
from
presenting
my
my
own point of, from my own point of view, accusing me of willfully harming a child is absolutely reprehensible to me,
Yeah.
and it demands response.
And this is one of the most sinister things about feminism is it places men as not just perpetrators, but as dangerous. So when somebody says, when the feminists say, for instance, I want a safe space, I want to be shielded from men because I feel afraid. The notion hidden behind that is that men are all
Inherently dangerous.
And what this does, as Dr. Peterson rightly noted, is that it reinforces their fears. When you shut them away and you say, this is spaces for women now, men can't enter, you're reinforcing their fear. Not only reinforcing
Holy
it,
shit! Sorry to disturb you, to disturb this train, but I wrote it into a song once, and it just struck me because the song was about SJWs, yeah.
Yeah.
And I sung about their safe spaces, and in the last verse I wrote literally safe among their own fears. In the safe spaces, locked from the outside world, among the fears that they were that put them there in the first place.
And but that's one of the fundamental failures of the safe spaces is that
Yeah.
all of the psychological data that we appear to have so far says that if you have a phobia, certainly you should not be exposed immediately,
Right.
but you should be over time in the
Desensitized.
imperative phase,
able to cope with it at some point.
Desensitized to it, yeah.
introduced to it enough that you can once again cope.
How do I bring a web page on here so I can show you guys this article? It's on my iPad.
Well, if nothing else, you could link it in the sidebar that we have, and I can
Yeah.
share it myself. I mean, I'm not sure how an iPad works. I'm PC master race, and I'm kind of a dick.
I use Linux Mint here, but it's a Canadian student's push for man ban at campus gym for 1 hour every day. And
Okay, well, I have an absolutely wonderful solution. It's called Club Fit, and in my own city, the Muslim women here actually love that place because they're in an environment that is solely populated by women. They can wear all of the latest fashions, and this is actually their social destination.
Well, that is a bit different, right, from the escapism that is inherent in the safe spaces, because in the safe spaces you just hit pause on whatever is bugging you every day of your life.
And this is the interesting part. They're afraid of men, but all anyone has to do, especially with Bill C-16 that's coming up, you just walk up to the door. I'm sorry, sir, you're not welcome
Bill
here.
C-16 is not coming up. It has been passed without a record of parliamentary vote.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
And I heard they turned down public consultation as well. They didn't even consult their own constituents.
This is why there has been significant talk of a center-left party that is not liberal and is not New Democrat. There are a large number of people that feel that there is the possibility of another party within the center-left.
It's going to have to be.
But this kind of breaks into where I'm going to get straw man to fuck, regardless, because Saul is aware of my basic philosophical leanings and knowledge.
Yeah.
I understand enough generally about identity to be able to say that all of the things that make me up are probably, to some extent, relatively easily describable. So
Perhaps, but but words that describe
yeah,
you do not make you.
they're words that other people understand to mean things. So
Yeah, this is called a social construct, and this is
Yes.
what it amounts to. That doesn't mean
So-
that you, as you, are a social construct.
no, and that's the thing is that I played hockey for 20 years and I've been involved in construction for 20 years. And the first 15 years of my construction experience was as a roofer, but my last almost 4 years has been as a scaffolder. And there's all these little bits that make me up.
Yeah.
They're these little building blocks that form my picture of myself internally and as how I describe myself. And one of those that I feel is key to me is my identity as a Canadian.
Hmm.
I'm really proud of the fact we have an amazing Olympic hockey team, and that when shit goes wrong in Rwanda, well, Rwanda's not a good example because we fucked that right up. But generally speaking, when things go terribly wrong, Canada pours its heart out on behalf of the people that are in some form of distress. We send our army or our armed forces to help them. And like, Canada is this wonderful country that's full of people that really just want more people to be Canadian.
Hmm.
And I look at the world around me and I'm going, okay, well, yeah, okay, Justin Trudeau would like to help some people in Syria. Can we be sure that those people coming over want to be Canadian before anything else?
You
Or
don't
that
build a
they
parallel
want to be
society.
helped.
I don't care if they want to be helped. I care that they want to be Canadian.
Yeah, you want.
Do
You
they
don't a
want
parallel
to
society set
engage
yourself.
in this altruistic? Because I've got this weird theory that most of the socialist countries are socialist countries because they're all northern countries, and if you're not socialist in a freezing cold country, you freeze to death.
This
If you're
is a weird,
if you're in
weird
northern
theory
Poland,
because-
or if you're in Sweden, or if you're in Canada, or if you're in northern China, and you are not willing to share with people, you're going to fucking freeze to death. That's the way that works.
well, not anymore, not here.
Maybe it doesn't happen much in Poland now, but once upon a time it did. If
I'm
you
not
want
so
to be-
sure about that because
I think there's enough correlation to warrant further investigation.
Well, if we are passing that why socialism happened here,
So I'm saying socialism, not communism.
okay, so socialism, but socialism accompanies communism. I do know, I do pass the difference
can.
between the two, but socialism doesn't exactly help people not freeze to death.
It's more of the social. We're social creatures. We look out for.
Well, and I'm really using a very, very simplistic concept to describe socialism in this case. In this specific case, is that the altruism required to survive a particularly harsh environment breeds a sort of socially interactive necessity.
Yeah, I could.
If you look at, say, the Inuit or the Laplanders or whatever, they have a relatively socialist community style.
Well, don't we all?
We don't always.
Not always, of course not.
If you can,
but we do.
If you can march through,
we do adopt much of the socialist.
I think we have a
things
biological
because-
underpinning that drives us to these particular behaviors. But what you have is
Yeah.
once you have a culture set up, precedent begins to build. And once we learn better systems of control, of distribution, and things like that, not necessarily the communist way, but to give and the compassion, these things become culturally ingrained. But then therefore, it must be culturally maintained. If you don't have a certain atmosphere of
privation and hardship.
exactly, then it begins to unravel because you begin to see people don't need to appreciate what they have anymore. There's less need to share. There's less need to
Let me
know your neighbor.
even boil it down more simply. If I can walk through, let's say, and it's really tough. Even I'm relatively aware of American geography as opposed to Canadian geography.
Mm-hmm.
If I travel,
Ironic.
well, if I travel, because there's not a really clear temperate zone where you can survive year round without.
Yeah, sure.
If I travel through, say, Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
I can potentially, if I am aware enough of my surroundings, I can feed myself entirely out of Mother Nature. Like I can bumble about and I can find things to eat.
Mm-hmm.
But if I am in northern Canada, even if I am above the 49th parallel, my ability to survive is predicated either on my supreme ability to survive
Mm-hmm.
or my ability to coordinate with others to survive.
Absolutely, but that is the case for all species, no matter the climate, even because other than climate, there are also other
so
factors that
I'm-
the society creates on its own.
True.
Going to demonstrate this through a little bit of analogy.
Yeah.
In the prairie provinces of Canada,
Mm-hmm.
coyotes, as a subspecies of Canidae, are relatively solitary. They tend to form mating pairs and not much more. Coyote packs tend to be no more than a mating pair and 2 to 4 offspring.
Mm-hmm.
In British Columbia, the coastal province of Canada, they actually tend to function as pack animals, much more like wolves. Because in that environment, if they don't cooperate, they can't hunt effectively and compete with wolves.
Yeah.
Wolves tend to, in Alberta, have much smaller pack sizes than you would see in, say, northern Alberta, where larger pack sizes. I'm talking. The initial example is wolf packs in central and southern Alberta or central and southern Saskatchewan tend to be smaller because they don't have to have larger pack sizes in order to accommodate their necessity to hunt for moose, elk, etc., larger game animals. The further the extreme of the environment goes, the more likely you have some form of substantial social interaction.
But social interaction
and
The fundamental requirement for it, I would argue.
Yeah, and I would think that the key word that you used, and it is a very good word because it means more than just, the weather conditions, is environment. Precisely, I think that how we as humans, back to humans, operate in given environment is predicated on the nature of the environment, but that doesn't mean that a given environment gives us a sustainability in the same sense that another sort of environment would.
But
In
to be fair,
other circumstances.
in sub-Saharan Africa,
Mm-hmm.
it is literally theoretically possible for a single monkey to walk along and eat termites or pick grubs or grab something off of a tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once you move beyond that temperate band, you immediately require significantly more social cooperation, social interaction, some form of behavior that, whether it's intentional or not, mirrors a soft form of socialism at a minimum.
Okay, but I invoke the Maslow pyramid of needs.
Okay, that doesn't dispute the fact that my
No.
need may require more
I
than
do
my
not. I do not try to dispute you. I'm trying to build over your point. I mean, what you are saying is completely valid. But then let's say we have the perfect climate, the perfect circumstances for a society to thrive.
Mm.
But in this context, as you said earlier, we do not need to appreciate what we have,
Mm.
so we seek for other things that we actually do need to appreciate.
Yeah, it's going to
And
begin to break
that
down the social structure.
Well, yeah, it goes up the pyramid in this context.
Well,
So
and
the
that would be my
society
argument.
in a nurturing environment creates other tiers of those things that we
Of
apparently
necessity.
need. Yeah.
I would say that if we based it in biology, because if groups do not cooperate with one another, if they don't police their less cooperative elements, like there's somebody with a mental illness or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
if they don't function as a group, everyone dies. So the group would have to function together no matter the case. And I think in every environment across the globe, we all face relatively the same challenges. We have to find food. We have to adapt to any number of animals, the terrain, or whatever the case. But if we look at, say, the Inuit, they were subject to a different environment. It could just be that we have very similar traits for compassion and cooperation and social behavior, but different environments enforce different kind of behaviors. And if you remain in that environment long enough, it's going to cause a cultural tradition, which is
Essentially, I hate
becomes
to use
a self-reinforcing, behavior.
I don't like using the term to describe it, but it fundamentally, it's an episociatic as opposed to epigenetic, perhaps. There are certainly epigenetic elements. If you have a society that undergoes privation and famine, then ongoing generations will then react differently to surplus. That's something that you can demonstrate by studying the epigenetics of that society. And I would almost say that, like in the case of the Inuit, there's an initial episocietic. Not sure if that's a word. There's a social need that drives an epigenetic sort of set of differentiations.
Well, it's a genetic underpinning for all social species to have certain group behaviors and to be predisposed to certain behaviors, certain emotions
Well, I
that
mean,
reinforce social behavior.
I just have to look at Southeast Asia and look at the fact that there are members of and I cannot remember the name of, there's a specific pre-Homo sapiens group that most of the Southeast Pacific has as 4 to 6% of their genetic makeup.
Denisovians?
Denisovians. So Denisovians genetically are like amazing, because this is genetic material that permits people to be highly resistant to UV light, and also at the other extreme, be supreme consumers of oxygen. Because Denisovan DNA is present in Tibetans, but it's also present in Malaysians and Peloponnesians and all sorts of other, like, I'm just flabbergasted by the notion that this particular DNA group is just so demonstrative genetically. Like,
I think
wow.
I think the environmental factors play on.
But that's the thing, is like if you look at Denisovan DNA,
play on the development, maybe.
Yeah, because if
Okay.
you think about, say, the ancient Athenians, the ancient Greeks, what was the book called? Guns, Germs, and Steel. It has a very specific environment where you had very isolated peoples that could develop for extremely long periods of time without being invaded or attacked. They were isolated from one another, and they had very stable, very temperate climates. So they had long periods where they could develop, advance, and grow. Whereas people in, say, the Arabian Peninsula had a much harder time developing large societies, less food production, less arable land. So it's going to produce a different type of society, a different type of culture overall. And these
Yes,
things
the
tend to play this out.
environment, broadly understood environment shapes
Right.
in what manners and and generally
Right.
at,
And it
at
could be
what
that
to what degree we cooperate.
it could
I
be,
think.
yes, it's the same compassion, the same social factors that play out in all of us play out differently in different environments because we're forced to adapt in different ways and build
Because
systems which allow us to survive there.
yeah,
So,
because they become complementary.
yeah, it's sort of like what's happened in the West, the way Christianity didn't necessarily give way to the Enlightenment, but it sort of paralleled the Enlightenment, and they sort of tempered one another. The search for the truth it was part of the search for God, and the way they sort of, for many early scientists, was to search for the truth was to search for God, and it sort of, and then if you look at something like the Protestant Reformation, the Protestants were big on you have to study the Bible yourself. You need to independently investigate. You need to independently read, and then they started huge programs to go around and teach people how to read so that they could read the Bible. And the printing press came along and all of this stuff. So this happened here in a way that it didn't happen elsewhere. And you have to understand the impact of Christianity on the Enlightenment values, on how it spread, because the whole purpose was be skeptical, investigate for yourself. This is extremely important. It's the highest importance thing you can think of. And you need to know how to read so that you can do it and investigate. And that kind of spread out from there. And it was a cultural thing.
Yeah, whereas the Judaism and the Holy Scriptures, I refer to them lately as desert tribe survival guides. They had to be dogma back in the day precisely because of this cooperative requirement that allowed certain tribes and certain cultures and certain societies to survive at all. Wouldn't you think?
In China, there was a period, I can't remember what the time frame was, but it was known as the 100 Schools of Thought. China had gone through a long period. It was, I'm not sure, but they had developed almost Greek levels of philosophy and thought and school, and you could see these systems developing. That China had a period of extremely different politics came into play, and it was illegal for them to sail beyond what you could see of land. So they weren't able to leave. They couldn't explore the world. And at one point, Chinese trading vessels made it all the way to Africa and back, even before the Europeans. So if China had continued on the course of expanding and growing as they had been before political troubles kind of cut that off, they may have done what the West did in the world.
Yeah, the Greek gave us the words to describe what drove the Chinese culture at large. It is xenophobia. Have you ever maybe encountered how they refer to us white devils?
I haven't dwelled on it.
Yeah, it is something that somebody like me could perhaps have trouble understanding, but what I drew from any reports of how the Asian cultures developed in general is that they built a wall not only to fend from enemies, but to not have to necessarily see what the other people were up to, because they were devils, they were uncivilized, they were not of our ilk, and this was after years and years of building this culture in the first place, because the wall didn't happen until China became one nation, which it wasn't for a long time.
No, it was fractured. You had the Warring States period.
Oh, just like Germany not so long ago.
Yeah, and even in modern times, it was fractious until the late 19th century. Fractured, rather.
Yeah, I would say so. Even though they at least had the nationality to speak for before Bismarck even came along. They generally outran us at quite many things, which is part of why we learn so much from them right now. And at the same time, being xenophobic as hell, they do appreciate what the white devils bring upon them, and they develop upon that, giving it their own spin. Just look at the Japanese, for instance. I'm referring to the Asian cultures at large.
Japan
They
and South Korea are really they took with the best of Westernism and sort of
and
ran with it.
and made it their own.
Kept the unique
And-
cultures of their own of their
And
own.
there was no bullshitting about cultural appropriation, because this is how cultures are built,
Right.
and they just went with whatever made all this work for them the best.
Yeah, and that's what social justice is. It's a way of forcing an ideology.
Well, this is the opposite of all that.
Yeah, I know. That's what I mean. It's systems have to develop naturally. What happens is when you look at, there's a reason in the United States, you guys may know about the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which forbids state religion, state involvement in religion. We have to look at why this thing came about. Why did freedom of religion start? Many people, and I've talked to people, and it seems that they believe that it was just a philosopher sat around and we just be so tolerant, but that's not how it really happened. It started because of religious tension. It cost more to fight your religious enemy than to just leave them alone and tolerate them. So you look at something like what was it, the Edict of Nantes in France. It was issued by the king because the French Huguenots were being persecuted. So the French Huguenots armed, and there was going to be trouble if the king had tried to kill them or stop them. So the king said, "Okay, we'll issue an edict of toleration. And what we'll do is we'll leave you alone. You leave us alone." And that's where it started. They started realizing that if you have one idea that wants to insert itself as supreme, it will eventually take control of the state, and the state will use the force of government, because that's what government is. It's the initiation of force, to compel people to comply. Well, naturally, people won't comply. You end up with war and thousands of times. And then what happened.
I was
the St.
just
Bartholomew's
about
massacre.
just thought about that and the schisms that kept happening at those times.
Exactly. So
They would use the resources of the governments to wage their own religious wars, and no government wanted that.
Well, and now we come back to what is fundamentally happening in Ontario and in Canada in general.
Oh,
The execution of a narrative and an agenda.
Right.
And
this is what I mean with the lack of toleration. Is the Edict of Nantes was eventually rescinded, and then you had the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, in which some 5 to 30,000 French Huguenots were put to the sword in one day.
well, now
Yeah,
This is what happens. Yeah.
So I don't think people are going to be put to the sword necessarily.
let me juxtapose my position on the necessity of the language that is expected to be legislated. Okay, so in Bill C-16, there is this expectation that I will be legislatively forced to use language, correct?
Right.
That's certainly my understanding as a Canadian. And if I were to go to Ontario, the Ontario Human Rights Act would certainly compel me to use the language that an individual asserts is adequate to describe their identity.
Yeah, which is what Dr. Peterson warned about.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying. We have the Establishment Clause because when a group of moral absolutists think they know how to build utopia.
This is the instance when you know for sure they cannot, because they do not count in individuals in it at all, because they figure all individuals will conform necessarily.
Except that
which goes against everything that they preach, especially in relation to the isms.
And that's the thing, is that I require no specific legislation to demand that I particularly respect an individual.
Yeah, this is how the problem starts. Moral absolutists want to know what's best for you, even though you know otherwise, because they're an ideology. They're not willing to reassess their position. So what they do is they attempt to leverage the power of the state to force compliance, which then leads to greater social breakdown and eventually war. That's why we have the establishment
And
clause.
that would actually be what Jordan Peterson argues, is that
Exactly.
based on his at least according to him, expansive study of Soviet Russia and similar processes, he certainly argues that the processes of Soviet Russia lead to an inevitable violent breakdown.
Exactly, and that's why we in the United States Constitution we have that enshrined for religion, but it's the same principle with social justice. You have moral absolutes.
Actually, I would argue that the freedom of religion is all, and I believe this has actually been argued by the Supreme Court, is freedom of religion is freedom from religion.
It is. It is. It's because it's basically the law is. It's the ability to practice what you please. So atheism is a form of practicing non-belief. It's a form of being in a
Basically,
state of unbelief.
it boils down to a subset of a freedom of association. You are free to associate with other members of a similar belief system, or none at all.
Well, what I'm getting at is that the Establishment Clause is meant to protect us from moral absolutists who would assert themselves through state power to force compliance. That's what a social justice warrior is doing. It's not religion, but it's a set of beliefs they want, that they hold as moral absolutes that they believe you need to legislate to have their utopia created. So it's the same thing. They have their.
If I understand what Dr. Peterson has studied, it's not just the premises that infected and informed Soviet Russia, but it's also the nature of how ideology is a pseudo-religious construct.
That's exactly what it is, and that's why I warn against it with pointing to the Establishment Clause, because it seeks through the exact same process that a religion would attempt to take over the government and perhaps institute Christianity throughout the whole nation. They would do that with social justice.
I'm Catholic, or I was at least born and raised Catholic, so let's examine how that construct compares to, say, feminism. So there were Romans once upon a time that were very, very bad people to Christ and his burgeoning religious sect, which at that point would have been a subsect of Judaism.
Yeah.
And so therefore, Christ decided to take it upon himself to give up his life in order to not only absolve us of our sins, but to protect us from those that would other us. So how is that particularly different from this group is trying to other us, therefore we're going to have Sean King as our martyr for BLM, or Bell Hooks for our martyr of, or Lacey Green for that matter, for our martyr of feminism, and therefore we should Anita Sarkeesian as a martyr. She's suffered no end of slights.
Well, it does have its system.
Some of which are legitimate.
It does have its saviors in its system. The saviors are those who empathize with the victims and rush to support them.
Well, and that, again, going back to how Dr. Peterson describes the system, is that you must identify with the oppressed and therefore take on, basically it's nothing more than a savior complex.
It is.
Yeah.
Because I think it's also
and that's the thing, is it's not.
But I think it's a narcissistic savior complex rather than based in compassion. Because it's always about the individual. How do I look?
Yeah, something that I pointed out earlier too.
Yeah.
The virtue signaling and look at me, how progressive I am.
But that's going back to what immediately came before that was, and this is a point I made on a Facebook post that I've never received a reply to, and it was only a couple 3 days ago.
They never replied to me either.
But it was only a couple 3 days ago. But the civil rights and LGBTQ plus, however many syllables you want to add to it, those movements back in the 50s through 70s were based upon the fact that no part of my identity precludes me being a functional individual within this society.
Right.
And now we've reversed that.
categorize people based on whom they wish to fuck with.
being sucking a dick or having black skin or whatever subtype was not preclusive to being a functional member of society.
Well, that's what Marxism seeks to do in its attempt to institute equality of outcome. It needs class warfare. That's
so far as I can tell, is Marxism requires some level of this is oppressed, this is oppressor, therefore we must fight, regardless of how many subtypes we create.
That's what intersectionality is. Intersectionality is class warfare. It's
not enough that you're black. How are you black? Are you black because you're black from Chicago or black from Atlanta?
Exactly. They take arbitrary measures. They say, okay, you're this group, you're this group, you're this group. Here's the ladder. Here's the scorecard of how we list you according to class, and here's how you're going to fight amongst yourselves for power. But they give them a central core group that is always the evil. Now, I think we can identify who they think is always the evil.
Here's my problem, because fundamental to that theory is, you can never punch down, you must always punch up.
Yep.
And so, and I saw a cartoon, and it kind of got what I want, but not quite. So imagine a set of stairs that has a bottom, a back, and just stairs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where the bottom and the back meet is a fulcrum. By actual physical definition, it absolutely is. So by all of these Marxist definitions, of course, straight, cis, hetero, white males are naturally at the top.
Don't forget able-bodied.
Oh, well, yes. I'm absolutely sure that those are relevant somehow.
Yeah.
But regardless of how many stairs you put on this, you have a back and a bottom with that fulcrum point, the 90-degree angle at the base. And at some point, there is a tip. And this whole thing starts to rock. And theoretically, what you would prefer is that it balance on that fulcrum, that everybody be equal.
Mm-hmm.
But Marxist mythology and methodology strives not to push it to its balance point,
right,
but to tip it. And when you tip it beyond that balanced point, where the 90-degree angle rests at the bottom with a pair of 45s extending out to support however many steps you have, which, for all I care, could be 1,000,000 steps. I don't care. With 999,999 people stood balancing themselves awkwardly on these steps,
right,
but all equal. Marxist philosophy and methodology seeks to tip it completely over.
Yeah.
And that's when you get Nazis. If what you want is Nazis, that's how you get them. You take.
And meanwhile, the hierarchy or hierarchy, as they want to pronounce it, is looking to
create patriarchy.
Is looking to create. No. It's more insidious than that, because it's looking to create 7 billion steps on that.
Yes, where each individual is,
and it falls back to what Dr.
It is a ladder, but a ladder that is laid down on the floor, and everybody's clinging to their own to their own step, because
goes back to
everybody's punching everybody at something.
Yeah, that's the point. Is to keep. You can't build community trust. The moment you do that, you lose the ability to leverage each group in a struggle.
Which is ironic, because they want a system of conformity and compliance and cooperation.
That's why Dr. Peterson says it's a system of pathological oversimplification. What they fail to realize,
they want cooperation from everybody else.
Right. So they think what you need to do is to target the enemy group, and then hurt them until they're brought down to your level. The problem is, they believe that this brings feelings of empathy. You'll see this a lot in their articles. They're like, it's going to help you empathize and see from their perspective and their experience. But what it does is it fosters animosity. That's the problem.
All I have to do is look at everyday feminism and pay $300 and learn how to reconcile your white, whatever the fuck it was. reconcile your whiteness. Like,
White
I'm
fragility.
sorry.
And look
Did
look
you
how
just
close.
assume my gender and my ethnicity?
Exactly.
No,
And
yeah.
look how frighteningly close this language comes. And I say this all the time, Anshul, how frighteningly close to whiteness. How often did the
Mhm.
Nazis talk about Jewishness? You have
Mhm.
to, how these parallels to Nazism are crazy, because what was the foundation? The foundation of the Holocaust was this: you set groups, you treated people differently based on how they were born,
Mhm.
and this is what they're demanding that we do now. So they
Mhm.
want to take it, repackage it, and then resell it to us as justice.
And-
I don't think so. I don't
But
think so.
this is my argument based on identity.
Right.
I have no objections to somebody that wants to come from Syria, for instance, which is a war-torn shithole,
Mhm.
that wants to be a Canadian.
Exactly. And I don't mind people
And-
coming to America
and
that want to be American.
This is
But this is a set of beliefs we're talking about.
to the average liberal, my statement that I want somebody to identify as Canadian preeminently
supremacy.
amongst all of their other identities is ethnocentrism.
And
I'm not
white supremacy.
specifying
White
them.
supremacy all the way.
Yeah,
That's all
but
they
I'm,
claim. All I
I'm-
want is a set of ideas. Free speech, freedom of
I
religion.
think Canadians
Sure, you know
are
what I mean.
amazingly generous people, and I want you to be amazingly generous. And part of generosity is not killing people because they didn't conform to your religious ideology. I don't care what your religious ideology is. If it was David Koresh, I would tell him to get the fuck out. I don't give a shit. If any part of your religious ideology is intended to supersede the laws of the land, then I'm sorry, you are not welcome. I don't care what absurd. Honestly, I'm at the point where Amy Schumer should be her, Cher, Madonna, all of the rest of the fucking lunatics that said that I'm going to move to Canada. You are not welcome based on an ideology.
Oh, you want to know the fun part about that? Notice how none of them said they wanted to go to Mexico. They're a bunch of racists.
Well, they didn't want to go to Cuba either.
Yeah, I know. They don't want to go to anywhere. They want to go,
I am
it just doesn't make any
curious.
sense.
I am curious if any one of you had, perused the definition of social justice as is presented all over online. Let's put it this way, because what social justice warriors and the left and whatever is
The only definition
is touting is quite contradictory to what social justice is presented as.
Okay.
In fact, do you know what defines social justice at its core?
equality of outcome, equity.
No. This is what the Tumblrism would have you believe, but
Oh boy.
apparently social justice assigns rights and duties in the institutions of society, which enables people to receive the basic benefits and burdens of cooperation.
Okay, so
They all want the benefits of cooperation and
Without
don't
the
want
burden.
any of the burden. And this is what happened here in the USSR.
so what that boils down to is,
Everybody wanted the benefits.
what that boils down to is some animals are more equal than others.
That's what that's it always that's the point. That's the point.
Okay, so this will take a little bit of preamble, but
Okay.
I am this weird amalgam of minarchist and voluntarist, and it's this weird Canadian version of it.
Mm-hmm.
I sincerely believe that there should be borders and that there should be the resources to protect them. There should be emergency services of all natures, and that a minimum level of healthcare and education should be provided. But I sincerely believe that if you are capable of succeeding to a point at which you are no longer required to take advantage of those minimal levels of education and healthcare, you can certainly look beyond them. And so that is this really weird socialist kind of take on how to be voluntarist, I guess.
Socialism's problem falls back into the basic dangers of government and the tendency of people to want more. People never vote themselves less stuff.
Yeah,
Government
well,
never seeks for
there's
itself
never
less
been
power.
there's never been a coup or a social movement that has ever removed itself from power once its goals were accomplished.
Exactly. So the people never vote themselves less power. Government never seeks. People never vote for themselves less stuff, and government never seeks to get for itself less power. And what you have is politicians learn that they can bribe taxpayers with their own money, and people are quite happy to give away their freedom in exchange for more stuff. And it's a cycle. That's how it starts with socialism. That's why freedom is always less, and that's why you get endlessly some animals are more equal than others, because they target the group that's the oppressor and they hurt them. They give them less rights than the group that they're trying to raise up, and you end up with a system of imperfection.
Well, I mean,
yeah, because this, as I'm fond of saying that this is getting even and not getting
Oh yeah,
equal.
it's all based in resentment. Dr. Peterson's absolutely right on that one.
Oh, yeah.
They talk about wanting to get rid of racism, but understand what individualism itself does. It says you're not a member of a group. You can't see other members as members of other groups. Everyone can only be judged by the content of their character. What this does is it murders racism.
Yeah.
You can't see yourself as a member of a group, therefore you cannot assign yourself the label of superior.
Yeah.
You cannot assign the member of another group the other label of inferior.
And therefore you cannot. Yeah,
you only get
cannot.
social capital so long as you're willing to treat people as individuals, and it becomes a system where group identities begin to break down, because you get social capital for breaking them down. But what identity politics is that no, we need to build these walls back up. Hey, white people,
well, and that's
identify as white.
that's my argument about
Develop a racial consciousness. Hey, white people, see that it's okay to treat people differently based on the color of their skin. Oh, and by the way, we're going to hurt you. What do they think would happen? And then the far right, we're talking about the actual racists like the KKK, are just waiting to take advantage of this. And that's exactly what they're doing. And it's horrifying.
And that's the thing, is that I was raised to judge character, not characteristics.
Yeah, so was I.
I actually work in an industry right now where I would say on the site I'm on, there's probably about 30% of the individuals are immigrants to Canada.
Mm.
And of course, oh, well, I'm not a racist fallacy. Well, motherfucker, can you fucking pound scaffold gear up, and can you pound it down? Can you do it in -5? Okay. I have about I have 6 hours before I have to get up and go to work. So I'm already up quite past my own fucking bedtime.
Mm.
I have to go to work, and there is a cold spell coming. We are talking about a difference of, it was -12 Celsius last night. It is expected to be -26 with 40-kilometer-an-hour winds, putting it at nearly -35. Can you go out in that temperature and deal with the fucking work?
Exactly.
I don't care where you come from. Are you willing to get in a chain and get the gear up or down? I don't fucking care.
That's the
I
problem.
don't care what you have. I care that you go to the bathroom, do your thing, close the door, and if you interact with me in the next stall, then it's about toilet paper, because it's not a fucking social destination. It's a bathroom. Like, so many of these arguments are so fucking absurd.
That's the point. The point is to break down individual identity, so that group identity can be made the chief factor, so that class struggle can be made the chief point, so that people can be pushed against each other.
It's absurd, because it's no longer class.
Exactly. And people
that's why I
blame their
call it
failings in life.
pseudo-Marxism, is because
it's a new
if you want to say proletariat versus bourgeoisie, okay, well, you're differentiating classes.
Yeah.
Theoretically, economically. But when you say black versus white, or Democrat versus Republican,
that's why it's cultural Marxism.
Whatever, then and this is the same argument with social justice. Once you add that extra word, once you append upon it, you are fundamentally changing the word, and you are, to me, diminishing it massively.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is Marxism, but not that kind of Marxism, not real Marxism. It's just this sort of Marxism we cherry pick and make a thing out of it.
All of those alt-right people that are being created by the fermentation of identity politics, they're not real Nazis. I mean, that's the end game, folks. I hate to be an asshole about this, but oh, well, white men are always evil. The patriarchy is a thing. The wage gap is a fundamental factor of white, cis, hetero, patrio, whatever culture. What you are producing is the antithesis of what you want.
Exactly. Because that goes back to what
In
I
the
said.
50s,
They reinstall.
But in the 50s and the 70s, it was legitimately about, I do not want to be judged by this inherent characteristic. And now we are overemphasizing the most minute. I'm waiting for the person. I'm legitimately waiting for the first person to go, I'm vision I'm vision incapable because I'm wall-eyed.
They just keep trivializing everything and turning it into a class that needs to be defended or attacked. So everything becomes about class.
And the irony is that the overlaps and the misidentifications are ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't want to play identity politics, but you know what? I'm not technically white. According to the government, I'm First Nations. But I fucking look white. Well, fucking congratulations. Which one am I? Because you know what?
Do you remember the instance of Volksdeutsch?
Yeah, but here's the thing. I was not raised within that cultural dynamic. The Métis within Canada are a specific cultural dynamic. Like the Riel Rebellion was a thing. There were people that were not fully native and were not fully European that wanted to carve out their own country. And they had a rebellion. And I descend from these people, but I was not raised within the culture that is relevant. I do not understand their social and cultural phenomena.
It is based in 2 points. They want collective rights to be more important than individual rights.
Well, that's too fucking bad.
See, that's the point. And here's, I got a paper pulled up in front of me now. It was a peer-reviewed scientific paper paid for with tax dollars. Here's the abstract. Students share folk beliefs that will make it difficult for them to understand inequality and the harmful consequences of social practices they routinely engage in or attach to. 4 of these folk beliefs include harm is direct and extreme and a product of the individual's intentions. And for harm to occur, there must be an individual to blame. They call individualism folk beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this past peer-reviewed scientific quote unquote.
I will give you an excellent example of folk belief.
This is nuts.
I will give you an excellent example of a folk belief in which there is a specific individual to blame. Hansel and Gretel. The witch is absolutely to blame. Oh, I'm sorry. That contradicts the feminist narrative that women are inherently angelic individuals that are worthy of infantilization of denial of agency.
Yeah.
But did you just assume the witch's gender?
I assumed that based on the Marxist narrative that individual was somehow not responsible for pedophilia and murder.
See how it always comes down to relieving people of agency as well, their individual agency. So if you take something like women that are alleged victims of rape, now what they do is the feminists come along and they say, look, these are we have to protect them from being re-traumatized. They can't face they
awesome.
Can't be in the same courtroom with them. So what the point is to infantilize their emotions, say they need protection, say they can't stand up. That's harmful to women. It's creating a new social dynamic of this is how women are. We have to protect them. Look, they can't.
Except that would inherently be sexist because that would be generalization based on gender.
I know.
But this is a handicap proposition.
I'm still waiting to find out if Smugly Puff is going to identify as male or female in court.
Apparently, she's going to go as a female.
Oh, because unfortunately, females are less likely to be found guilty. Fascinating.
Well, I got that from Tilde, who subsequently pulled the video down, so maybe I'm wrong, but I managed to watch it.
Tilde's video did question whether or not Smugly Puff would present as male or female.
No. There was a second video that he pulled down. I don't know why.
I didn't see the second video. I saw the video where he questioned whether or not it would occur.
Yeah, and he made the second video precisely about that, about Smugglypuff and the other bloke,
The
the one that
very
attacked
goth-looking
Warren.
individual.
Yeah, this one. So they are both changing gender for the sake of the court, according to that video. But
Yeah,
since it was pulled down, I don't know if it was all right.
I'm.
Who knows?
But the irony is that I'm sure that somebody will quote mine me at some point for saying that there is such a thing as, in complete fucking contravention to Prime Minister Selfie's contention, that oh, I'm sorry. Would you prefer I call him Prime Minister Hair Gel?
How old is this guy? He's only like 26, right?
Trudeau, he's 43.
43? I don't know. He still looks like he's 20 something.
Okay, I'm not much younger than him. And according to him, there is no inherent Canadian identity. That's because you're the motherfucker that was busy yammering on about being a feminist rather than dealing with wildfire.
All about value signaling.
Yeah.
All about the social capital that one gets.
Yeah. Well, and people wonder why there's a burgeoning alt-right, why there's discussion of future parties in the center left. I mean, I've been asked to participate in creation of a center left party, for fuck's sakes. If it happens, my entire channel goes down.
I'm a classical liberal individualist, and I'm slowly that content of character, race doesn't matter. None of this stuff matters except the individual and their equal rights for every person individually. And I'm slowly seeing myself become one of the rare persons around now.
I am so far.
I would
voted.
relate to you on that matter, although in my Twitter bio, which is so far my only bio online that I keep, I have doomed meritocrat and the label denialist.
Yes, but the irony is that I have voted further left than any party has ever inhabited in the U.S., and I'm consistently called alt-right.
No, of course you are.
It's about othering you. It's about putting you
that's exactly
into
what
the
it
oppressed
is.
category, and you're the oppressor. And then the class struggle, and then they leverage state power against you, social power against you, to keep you down, to tear your group down. Because remember, you're not you. You're a representative of your whole
Yes,
group.
that would be
you,
that would be
group.
That would be why Jill Stein's comments about reparation piss me off, because I know half a dozen individuals in the U.S. personally that are descended from both slaves and slave owners. Like, do they cut themselves a check?
This is
I'm
where you
confused.
get into the horrifying part. What if somebody is 17% of African descent? Do we give it to them? What about 18.5? What you have to do is you have to have a government-run racial purity test to qualify.
Yeah, so
not only who pays, but who gets paid. And then
Here's where it gets really disturbing. Is it about the one drop test? Is that what we deal with? Because that's how the KKK dealt with it.
This is horrifying stuff. It really is. They don't think about the implications of what would be needed to implement these programs.
No, because any consideration further along is automatically slippery slope, regardless of the legitimacy of the concern.
Right. Because they're still looking for equality of outcomes. So this is something I see very often online. You'll see two people having a debate, and they're like, "You're social justice warrior. You don't want equality," and she'll say, "Yes, we want equality. You don't." And what they're doing is they're talking past each other because they have two completely separate definitions.
Mm-hmm.
The individualist is saying individual rights, individual equality for the individual person, with equality of opportunity. The SJW is saying no, equality of outcome with collective rights, and that's why they talk past each other every time.
Here's the analogy I use: is that there's that stupid picture of three guys of different heights trying to watch a baseball game, and
I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the equality one, which is all of them have one box. And there's the equality of opportunity one that they present. That is, they all have boxes according to their heights. Well, technically, equality of opportunity would actually be ladders or taking the fence down.
Okay, but I saw the version of this one, and it had additional picture to it, which was liberty, and
which was taking the fence down.
it had no wall.
Yeah. Now, equality of opportunity would be putting up ladders and letting them choose to watch the game. Liberty, under the, I presume, and libertarian or ANCAP principle, would be elimination of the fence, which, I mean, if you want to stand in the outfield and take a fucking take a line drive to the skull, I mean, I'm all for that. I'm going to laugh at your ass. I mean, if you want to be in the field, fucking give her hell, man. I mean, sure, you're not getting paid $3 million a year. But sure, get out there. Fucking watch the game from the fucking middle of left field. I don't care. But I mean, the equality of opportunity to that is you provide them with ladders, and they can choose if they want to watch that baseball game or go the fuck home and watch some other thing.
Your sense of personal responsibility and your work ethic drives you how far you can go. Now, naturally, there are going to be some things that might hinder you in that, and that can be understandable. But for the
if you're
vast
missing a
majority
fucking leg, you might have a problem with getting up the ladder.
Exactly. But beyond that, the majority of people, or at least reasonably so, are able of climbing that ladder of social mobility with the application of work ethic, proper education, and if we work to address, say, inner cities that may have poor education, work to deal with that, because what we're doing there is we're not reaching up and pulling down, we're reaching down and pulling up.
If we're
That's
going to
different story altogether.
If we're going to discuss how the North American educational model has failed much of North America,
it's been co-opted.
That's a whole other stream, to be fair.
The interesting part about my country is the First Amendment is absolute. Absolute. No violations. You can't do it. Anytime a college tries to pass a hate speech law, it's gone because it's applied to the colleges here. So that's one thing I'm very thankful for. It's a strict constitution.
Yeah, well, I'm just waiting to see how it turns out with, like, I know somebody personally that was refused financial aid because they owed money to the university they went to. And that university is now offering both sanctuary status and additional financial aid to illegal immigrants. And I'm just waiting for that to be smashed by Title IX, because Title IX implicitly and explicitly denies that as a reasonable outcome.
Trump is very, as far as here in the United States, our election was a full sweep. We took most of the governorships, most of the state legislatures. Then we took the House of Representatives, the Senate, so we own all of Congress.
Hillary lost the fucking Rust Belt. Okay,
she lost everything. The conservatives own
the Rust Belt has consistently voted Democrat for 30 years.
Yeah.
How bad do you have to fuck it up? How bad do you have to fuck it up that people that supported your husband do not support you?
They sold all their jobs. They gave them away. Yeah. Trump isn't even in office yet, and he's already saved several thousand jobs.
Yeah, but everything that ever goes wrong will now forever be known as thanks Trump instead of thanks Hitler.
And thanks alt-right.
Yeah.
And also thanks Gamergate. Because you know that Gamergate put Trump in the White House.
Well, I think it's important to note how deeply the left is attempting to use all of its power to try and hold on to as much. So what we're dealing with now is a state where they're trying to retain control rather than they're gaining control. Mm-hmm. They're exercising everything they've already gained to maintain what they already have.
Here's the thing. Like, there's GQ ran that article or video about, technically speaking, Pence can argue that Trump is not fit to take office.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, what fucking planet are you on that you think that Pence should be handed power for any period?
He's Keith Olbermann. He's a failed news anchor. He said there's I think it's the 25th Amendment. If the president is found unfit, say he had a stroke or had a mental break or something.
And Keith Olbermann fucking went on and on about how it's a 3-step program where basically on January 21st, Mike Pence issues a letter to the houses that says that Trump is not fit. And then the houses suspend Trump and install Pence in the interim.
They wouldn't have.
Trump has 3 days to argue he's completely fit. And then Pence argues back in 3 days that he's not. And then Trump can argue back again that he still is. And then if Pence argues back the third time that he is not fit, then the houses will collectively select a president.
It would fall to the vice president in any case, whether or not the
Do
president.
you want Pence in charge? This is how you get Pence in charge. Okay? Fucking Deus Volt. Fucking, if you like the cock, you get the shock Pence. This is a bad idea, folks.
I don't. Trump is LGBT.
Trump is
friendly.
going to turn out to be a centrist because
Yeah.
he wants to ensure that he will be remembered in the annals of history as having money, power, and fame.
He's our next Reagan, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what he's seeking to become.
He
And
wants
he
to
told the
wait-
Republicans to their face,
basic-
"You're no
this is
longer
the
the
ul-
Conservative Party."
This is the ultimate expression of, I'm a powerful man. You should see the size of my ego.
Mm-hmm.
I have to believe that's
Let's
part
just
of
hope
it.
it's
I
not
can't
the-
be one of those folks.
next
It's like, no, it
Nixon.
can't be. No, it has to be part of it. It's
You
part
know
of
what?
Trump's ego.
I will
I have
go
to agree.
after that fucking Oompa Loompa if he tries to fucking do anything. I will lambaste him myself. I think he was the least bad of four shitty candidates.
He
Bill
was.
Stein was a fucking horror show, and Gary Johnson wasn't even sure what planet he was on.
Gary Johnson was not a libertarian. He's not a libertarian.
I
don't know
think
why.
there's some socialist policies that merit examination.
Yeah, that's
I'm
not a
sorry,
libertarian
Johnson.
position.
What strain of pot were you smoking? Because I need some.
Yeah,
he
because
destroyed
I,
the
I
Libertarian
thought
Party.
Johnson was high all the time. Every time I
was.
saw him,
Absolutely.
every time I
fucking
saw
was.
him,
He didn't
he
know what
was
Aleppo
he was high as a kite.
How do you not know
And-
where Aleppo is? It's one of the most
And,
important.
and then
cities.
there's Jill, and then there's Jill No Refund Stein taking a Bernie fucking page there. I'm gonna force recounts. Oh, you gave me $7.8 million. I can't promise any recounts. Thanks.
Yeah,
She's already
I
given up,
thought
Pennsylvania.
I thought this was a brilliant ruse of hers
It was.
because
She's playing
she,
on the
th-
desperation.
she thought if I had a $1 for every dumbus under that petition to the Electoral College, wait, that's a great idea.
Pretty much.
She tried in was it Wisconsin to get to have a recount, and Trump actually got more votes.
Yeah, he got
got more
3
votes.
extra votes, I think.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
It was
because-
3, but I mean it's 3. But I mean,
even if that petition worked, the faithless electors never accomplished anything, and even
No.
fucking HuffPost fucking acknowledged that.
Right, and the ones that are turning are the ones that were voting Democrat anyway. They're already the Democrats in the states that Hillary already won.
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't do anything.
and here's my argument. Now, Maine and Nebraska have never actually enacted this power, but in theory, they can vote according to each electoral district's popular vote.
Yeah. In
I
most states.
see no problem with that functioning. Saying
Me
that
neither.
all of the electoral districts must vote according to the conscience of the electorate. Well, there you go. We're no longer complaining about the popular vote versus the electoral vote.
Mhm.
We are now reducing it to the popular vote in each precinct, dictating the vote of each precinct.
Because they assume that the electors would necessarily vote the right person to do it, and the right person is obviously the one they
On the
presume
right side
to
of
be.
history.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
precisely
it's all
that
about.
one.
I read a quote from Plutarch's Cato the Younger.
Just
he
note,
said-
just before that, just note that if they do not vote the person right on the right of the history, they are sexist, racist, misogynists, and they
If-
should
if-
be
Don't forget they're transphobic and many other phobics.
If you want to know how somebody was-
transmisogynist.
if you want to know how somebody ruled, just look at how they came to power. So just look at how the left is attempting to consolidate power through every means and everything.
Like a virus.
Exactly. So that's exactly how they would rule too. And we're seeing it in schools.
And that's exactly
administration.
how are they dying right now, because they only have one tactic and it's failing massively.
The problem with compassion, because that's what they take. At first, it began with compassion, though, didn't it? We saw them like, oh, they're oppressed. Let's help them. And you to a degree, you can understand, because in some cases that's true. But then what happened is they started abusing it. The victim culture came about, and then suddenly it was all about, creating
What-
fear.
what
and then you
I
get
see-
compassion fatigue.
Yeah. What I see as a worrying result of it is the rebound effect, where they effectively made more people less compassionate.
Yeah, it's compassion fatigue. It burns people out. You can't just keep saying, it's like Munchausen.
Here's the end
You,
result.
you can't keep living just to question your own racism and sexism and whatever.
Everybody feel bad all the time. It feel bad.
Here is the
compassionate towards me.
result
No, you burn
of
people.
what the progressive fucking behavior does.
Okay.
This is
This
what
is-
happens. There are
Yeah.
no healthy people left in the world. The last healthy person on the planet recently became infected with the alt-right. That is,
I feel like
won
the
the
last.
fucking. I have voted unionist for 20 fucking years. I am a member of a trade union.
Yeah.
You pricks are pushing me to the right because you are so far to the left that it is absurd.
It's a new future.
I used to identify on the left, and last I checked, I was a perfect centrist.
I still hold my position of limited government,
I
less
hold-
government regulations.
I'm half joking because I still hold the same belief in the individual. I'm
Exactly.
afraid. So no political compass will ever grasp whatever a
If
person
anybody's
is.
wondering, I also
Because one of the problems with political compasses is that they are two-dimensional.
yeah, well, but here if anybody's
Persons
wondering,
aren't.
I also
persons-
have a screenshot of Plague Inc. where it says progressivism has killed everyone on the planet
Mm-hmm.
because that's where we're going, folks.
It's about
No,
the
see,
consolidation
we
of power.
had these fucks before and we survived as a species.
Except the
and
problem is we're now at the point where it's literally a matter of progressivists flinging lemmings off the cliff, as the urban legend goes.
I would argue that less people,
It's not a bad
less people even bothered with listening to them.
Yep, I'm at the point where less people is not a bad thing.
In the United States, at least, we had a complete sweep. So we control the government now, essentially, in every effect. We now have the Supreme Court locked down for the next 50 years. It's ours. We own it. So
And
it's
I'm
in the
not.
United States,
I'm
at
not.
least.
And that's part of why I'm not comfortable with the two-party system.
Mm-hmm.
It does cause problems, especially since you're either a Demoblican or a Republican. They're the same party. They're basically the same party.
They might as well be. I mean, Trump was actually technically more liberal than Hillary.
That's why he's
Aye.
told the Republicans to their face, we're no longer a conservative party. He said we're the working class party now. So he's going to be like the Reagan
That's-
Democrats.
Which is funny because in Europe, the Green Party typically presents itself as the Workers' Party. And Jill Stein is very clearly the face of an elitist party, an oligarchical party.
Yeah, it's always about, they're always upper middle class kids in the colleges, or they're just rich kids. They've lived
Like
the most
I-
sheltered life you can imagine, and they want to look at
Like
us
I
and say,
said,
oh, you don't know.
I've been
know what it's
approached
like.
to help create a center-left party. If it happens, my channel gets tanked. Because I'll be too busy being involved in politics to even give a single shit about this stuff.
Everything is shifting. That's the problem, because you're given as a quote unquote centrist, you're given an ultimatum by either side, because either
That's
side
great.
is seizing power. You either pick one,
You
or
you
pick
know
the other.
you're doing your job right when everybody's mad at you.
Everybody's mad at me. I'm just I don't fit into a nice box, but I know the left is out of its mind, and I know the right is taking advantage of that.
Yeah,
Honestly, I know that
in
both
the
right
nastiest
and the
ways
left are-
possible.
the right and the left. Well, the right is starting to catch up on being out of its mind.
And what the right has
Yeah.
done in a either very bad ways, they've learned the tactics of the left. They've learned
Yeah,
them.
well,
They're
no bad
applying them
tactics,
very
only bad
efficiently.
targets.
And now
Well,
they have a
they-
president that just sends out tweets.
But they
Like,
had
the whole media is
they
clear.
had these tactics before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to agree. It just depends on the frequency. The Trump polarized the right. What Trump did was he discredited the media. He's destroyed their credibility with the American people.
Which
Everybody's-
means that they need to either reform as a functional fifth column, or they need to accept that they are nothing but a propaganda wing.
What do you guys think
Because-
of Rebel Media in Canada up there? I mean,
I'm not a particular fan of
No.
Ezra Levant, but
they're trying to grow their.
Sheila Gunn, really not a fan. Really not a fan.
I don't know much about them. I know they're one of the alternative. media
They're
outlets.
the Sheila Gunn, Reed, and Ezra Levant are the two top individuals in their scheme, and I'm a fan of neither of them particularly. Lauren Southern, I've spoken to her. She's a nice enough person. Don't have anything bad to say about her.
I don't know anything much about them.
I
watched
I
some of
don't
their
know.
stuff though.
Ezra Levant is particularly a shit disturber. Nope.
Uh-oh. We just
I
lose
might-
somebody?
Cut this off right away because I got to be up in 4.5 hours. So
Oh, okay. All right.
we'll do this again another time, though.
Yeah.
And hopefully, the little social worker decides to come and address the demonstrable evidence that their position is incorrect.
I hope that they turn around because it's forcing people to the right. It's forcing them far to the right, and I don't like that because I don't want to go far.
if you
I'm
if you
tired of the ultimatums.
if you intentionally malign people and discredit their experiences,
Yeah.
then you are driving them away from you.
Hello, welcome back. I
Hello.
don't know. I don't know at which point I was cut out.
I don't know, but I'm about to cut it off because I got to be up in 4.5 hours. So,
Okay.
so thank you to everybody that put up with this bullshit.
No, let's not do this again.
Yeah.
Any recommendations for somebody thinking about starting their own channel? Where you go?
Always be good with citations.
Yeah, you got to back up your work. I'm strict with having my information available so I can present it to those who
Most of the
research.
arguments I get about my channel tend to be, oh, well, you're not flashy enough. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not undoomed. But I have this tendency to oversight, so
Better over
take
than
what you
under.
get, bitch.
All right, better over than under. People should always do their accept nothing as truth but what you verified through independent investigation.
Yeah,
After
well,
you have,
I mean,
so that's why citations are
I-
incredibly important.
I provided 400 citations
That'll do
to
it.
the social worker. 400, 221 of which were independent empirical citations in a bibliography, which also had 65 meta-analyses cited. All you had to do was copy paste.
They probably just create a list of 400 sites and say these are the patriarchy.
Well, more or less. Well, and then there was also the amalgamation of active links to empirical studies on the subject. I mean, that's another almost 400, I believe. We're bordering on like an absurd amount of citations demonstrating that domestic violence is not a gendered issue.
Well, when your worldview runs on the suppression of truth in order to advance a specific ideological agenda, that becomes difficult for them.
It's no longer even an ideological agenda. It is a financial agenda.
Yeah, and even the evidence you provide them becomes the evidence that they use against you because your defense is they have been trained, proof that you're guilty.
Yes, well, denial of the necessity of feminism is
Right.
proof that feminism is a necessity.
Right. It's
This is why we need feminism.
Denial
feminism.
of the necessity of communism demonstrates that we need communism. Denial of the necessity of Nazism.
circular reasoning.
Is why we need Nazism. Yeah.
Circular
Yeah.
reasoning, absolutely.
As for my own part, for things that should be required for a YouTube channel, my YouTube channel isn't at all very popular, but I do not seek popularity. I rather want to have a backlog of well-reasoned analysis of certain newspeak that is being pushed all over.
Yeah, the changing of language. It's poison.
Yeah, and I'm trying to pass it in a functional manner. In what ways it works logically.
Right.
I cannot provide citations for that because it's just trying to pass whatever consequences it has in a most logical manner I can attain.
Mm.
So the point of this little ramble is not only be good with citations if you're gonna deal with certain tangential issues,
Right.
but also be able to put them out there, not in a flashy way, but in a way that could be comprehensible.
Concise.
And yeah, that would work, because
It's funny
people
because-
have fucked attention spans right now.
Well,
Yeah.
it's funny because people complain that I'm very simplistic. Well, I have this bizarre mix of a very stoic philosophy and of a non-governmental version of Scottish common sense realism. I need to be able to explain this to the average asshole that speaks my language.
Yeah, you got to break
But
stuff
do
down.
you get this from everyone? Because I tend
Actually, I mostly got the complaints from Croton T's subscribers.
to.
Why aren't you being highfalutin? Because I'm trying to reach people that have 2-syllable spans. Okay.
It makes
Well-
sense. There needs to be a broad range because more advanced people need to be able to go there, and then you need
Just be-
simplistic talking.
Well, I wasn't saying it should be simplistic, but it should be comprehensible. It should cover as much as possible
It needs to be
in at least
accessible.
in at least Gish Gallop way.
It needs to be it needs to be an accessible content.
Mm.
I need to be able to explain this in a manner that, if you are well above what if you are capable of operating above the jargon that I use,
Mm-hmm.
that does not mean that you do not understand that jargon.
Yeah,
Right.
but there is the assumption of goodwill, and then there must be goodwill to begin with.
Yeah, well, I'm going to aim for the average person because I feel that, regardless of what other people may say of me, that I am an average person.
Yeah.
If I can understand this, then I hope that other people can.
Yeah.
Yes, but just do not deal with the criticism of how simplistic you are, because that just proves how unsympathetic the people are.
Exactly. It's just another way of saying, "Hey, the truth is going bye-bye, so I can push my agenda." That's
Mhm.
exact. Yeah, they just want it reveals their bias. If they're not addressing truth, it shows that they have a reason for suppressing
Yeah.
it, which proves their bias.
Or in other words, they just want you to say what they want to hear.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
And
Or they
not everything is comfortable.
Or-
Just look at that guy T.
Right.
He punches everyone he catches on
But
discrepancies.
The second
He's
trick
not
is,
perfect because he's Ancapistan Tayyip, but he still nevertheless provides well-reasoned arguments
Right.
that people find disagreeable of.
But he
Fine.
still has not addressed my question about the tyranny of the majority.
That's too bad. Then you should bug him about it sometime.
Yeah, well,
because
so-
I would be genuinely interested in what he actually has to say, aside from trashing Spinosaurus skin.
Well, do you remember what the question was? Because
What was-
I'll flesh it out quick.
Okay.
Assume that I live at the uppermost position in a cul-de-sac with 9 other people. So there are 10 properties, and I live at the crest of the cul-de-sac. And the other 9 people have decided that in this ANCAP system that will be applied, that they are going to hire security company A to provide their security services. For whatever reason, I have determined that I am not willing to engage with security company A. Now, if something occurs on my property and I call security company B to come and attend that, and it turns out that they have to engage in an investigation on any other property in that cul-de-sac, they must then contact security company A, which means that there is now an additional cost due to the tyranny of the majority. How am I being served by my own personal desires in this ANCAP system? I'm being forced to pay additional costs now because I have chosen to pursue the free market. If I don't pursue my own interests, I am forced to comply with the tyranny of the majority.
Well, I am not very versed in the ANCAP make-believe, but from
so
what
that's
I
the
gather,
complete abolition of government, isn't it?
Well, it should be, but it's not.
Well, let me give you anarchy.
I just wanted to touch on how they usually deal with this kind of questions, which is, well, they have the ad hoc regulations.
Yes, well, let me give you the anarchy ball argument, which is, why is every stupid fucking extreme possibility relevant to you when none of my extreme possibilities are relevant? That's because, typically speaking, anarchy ball, when I present something to you as some kind of extreme position, it's not particularly extreme. And all of your extreme positions are predicated on this simplistic notion that we can all just get along, contrary to a lot of thousands of years of fucking proof.
Well, I think that it
And
falls under
Nagin.
the same problem. That
Never
we have
forget
with,
Nagin.
with communism. It reaches too far without considering humanity, without considering human nature, and the system is that under complete anarchy, somebody always wants power. Somebody always has enough resources to command others to seize power.
Yeah, well,
And if you don't have those resources set aside for yourself in an organized fashion, because you're going to have to organize something
yes,
to
well,
resist, there you go, and they will take it.
humanity is hierarchical.
Exactly. And by its very nature,
We
all
are,
social.
we are a social species that, for whatever reason, feels most comfortable in a hierarchical system.
It works. You can't have complete decentralized power because you can't vote. You can't have people voting on every single measure. The
What do I
government does.
do if the other 9 people in the
Let me just say
cul-de-sac
that
decide that
the
I must be
NAP
forced to use security company A?
I do not know, but what I feel very deeply is that NAP ends up being totally self-defeating, because while you are not being aggressive towards somebody,
You are not
somebody
preventing aggression.
somebody being aggressive on their own right, how can they be in any way punished for being aggressive
Without
no-
you being aggressive or without enforcing some level of coercion.
There's always going to be.
for example, or well, if you have another example is, if enough people band together to be aggressive to somebody, how are they to be stopped?
Yeah.
You got to organize to protect your own stuff.
Well,
Of
and
course.
I made that point.
But humans are fickle, and they probably wouldn't organize.
I made
Not-
the point that
Or not organize in time, which would be too late.
what prevents monopoly sure, the government could be argued to form a monopoly on various things, but what prevents unionization or counter-monopoly?
Separation of
Nothing.
Nothing. And I mean, my argument, and somebody wanted to argue with me, oh, you clearly can't be a roofer because you don't understand how roofing works. And I'm like, no, I understand perfectly how roofing works. If I am the only person for 300 miles that can provide you with roofing, all I have to do is be $1 cheaper than the guy 300 miles away, and
Right.
you're stuck with me if you want to make the most financially lucrative deal.
The
Yeah,
only
but-
thing I can think of that tries to
now-
limit monopoly is separation of powers, but that's not perfect. All it does is attempt to stop it, slow it down, or hinder it, so that maybe some corrective action can be taken. But it's the same cycle. People always vote themselves more stuff. Government always
And
seeks more power.
basically, it boils down to we're all a bunch of greedy monkeys. And we can be encouraged to altruism if there's a long-term benefit.
Exactly. There has to be some incentive for the individual inside their own society for them to be an active, engaged member of it. It has to be based in a system of incentive and reward, and people will work towards that end, towards a common social good under a system of individualism, which will allow them to express themselves, even though because they still have a social duty.
I have just argued this to a nihilist communist. The exact same thing the other day. The exact same thing that if people are to be equally rewarded, whether they work or not in a society, then what's the point?
Exactly. You don't get any
the
extra
incentive?
prestige.
Yeah.
Yes, because that person figured that people cannot be valued.
Exactly. It's the social capital we chase. So if somebody becomes a doctor and works really hard, they're very proud of that. They're very proud of the bigger house. Because it's not just the money incentive, it's the social incentive as well. The sense of identity and prestige from having this certain job, this certain role. If you empty all that out, all that's left is your ideology, which hurts everybody anyway.
Yeah, but also no people mass could ever accommodate it. It's counter natural. It's not viable. But this guy was a nihilist communist, so he couldn't get it somehow. It was a fun exchange.
So we'll leave it at that. That nihilists are unusual creatures.
Very.
I couldn't live that way.
Right.
Oh well, the nihilist philosophy isn't really what it is portrayed to be, but because the philosophers of nihilism recognize that the value at the end of the day is assigned by the people, and that they create the value for themselves, and it is as relevant as it is relevant to the people. They do not write off all this entirely, saying this is totally not real and just be done with it, bin it totally. Only the edgelords do that. So let's not write off nihilists completely, because I know that that's all only the fuckwits that do that.
Now it's better to engage with them because you could sharpen your own ideas. If they're wrong and you prove them right,
I am completely for that notion.
I want the people that disagree with me most to argue with me the most, because it sharpens my ideas and it may improve theirs. Who knows? You never know. You get the best.
You never know.
Content. A free marketplace is the best marketplace, and if it's going to be for ideas, that's how everybody wins. You don't get.
Thank you, Amcup.
Well,
No,
we're
just-
classical, but we
just-
share some.
Just kidding.
I'm
Just
going to
kidding.
kill it now because I'm tired.
Yeah, go to sleep.
Yeah. All right,
Thank
guys.
you for-
More free speech,
for
more
having
exchange of ideas.
Yeah.
Nihilists are strange, but they're worth poking at.
Yes.
And let's keep on living.
Hooray!
Keep on doing it.